Hey everyone, thank you for tuning into the Road to Full Stack Development series. I'm Code Crafting, and today we are talking about Git and version control. Now, I'm really excited about this video simply because there is a lot of new new developers coming on the scene that aren't entirely sure what Git is, or they're confused about Git because there are other tools around Git like GitHub. And so this is a very high level, simple video in which I'm going to cover Git real quickly and version control. And then I'm going to cover a number of different products and potential resources that may go with that. That way you can be a little bit educated about this, start digging into it for yourself. And eventually you're going to see me when I'm working on projects using Git all the time. Now, what is Git? Before we get into Git, it is important that you also watch the last video and that you're comfortable with doing some basic file management within your terminal or within a terminal within your IDE or text editor. And that's important because ideally, although there are graphic user interfaces that you can use to empower yourself for Git, it is really helpful to learn Git, what's going on under the hood, not just using graphic user interfaces. Although those are very powerful and there are some benefits and cons to that, I want to make that very clear. Now, what is Git and what is version control? I'm not going to create a bunch of videos going over a lot of this because this stuff is pretty generic and there are some great resources already out there for it. I'm not trying to create a channel in which I reinvent the wheel. I'm trying to create a channel in which I can plug you, the new developer, or anybody who's not entirely sure what's going on into the world of development, becoming an engineer, and just giving you high-level stuff that you can dig into with your own hunger and desire. So version control is not something new. Git is not the first version control system that ever existed, but on their actual website, you can see that Git is free and open source, which is a big deal. It's a version control system that's being distributed and is designed to handle everything from small and large projects with speed, but key efficiency. Now, what a version control system is, if we actually go to their documentation, you can see that they have videos on this topic, and you can watch this video and learn what is version control, what is Git, get going with Git, and you can actually get started. But this is something that is not just, oh, I should maybe learn this. This is used at companies and projects all over the world, and it is used by some of the biggest companies: Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Twitter, LinkedIn, Netflix. Maybe you've heard of those, maybe you haven't, but those specifically are an indicator of that these are the ones they're choosing to show. There are hundreds of companies and maybe even thousands of companies that use Git version control. Now, I will quickly mention, if we go to the documentation and we look at what is version control, this is really important. Version control is essentially, if I really, really boil it down to and water it down, which is a good thing in my opinion for this video, it's a way to see the changes and keep track of the history of changes of a file or files over time. And how that works is, you can imagine if you wrote, an entire book, or you did something and you wanted to roll back to an older version before you did a bunch of stuff. If you couldn't roll back, you'd have to go through it yourself and manually figure it out. And maybe, you made a mistake in adding something and you can't see where that mistake is. So going back to see the last version versus the version you're on, you can see, oh, that's what's changed. And it can help you identify things that have changed in files that have introduced bugs or problems, or maybe unexpected side effects. Now, Git is version control for that. So developer teams use Git to control the flow of their projects and who's working on what, and so that there aren't conflicts and conflicts get addressed. And there are a ton of small nuances that I could go into, specifics of why Git is worth learning and why you're going to need to learn Git if you're going to be a developer. So Git is incredible. There is a awesome website that I'm going to link below, which is essentially an entire tutorial provided by Atlassian, which is very visual, very clean, very I can't explain it other than it's very it's just great. Now the main issue is that most people are kind of confused of where to start, and they maybe have heard something like GitHub or Bitbucket or GitLab, and they aren't inclined to learn everything about it. They learn the minimum they need to learn, and that's something that is not the mentality to have. You want to learn Git and whatever tooling you're using for managing Git as best as possible, and every feature that you can click on and look into and find out and research, the better off you're going to be. So that being said, this is a great way to get involved. Their version of a management system that is kind of like a layer on top of Git itself is a product that they produce called Bitbucket. And so Bitbucket, I don't know if this actually leads to Bitbucket. I don't think it does. I think Bitbucket is over here. Bitbucket is a professional product built by Atlassian. They own a number of products. One of their other products is called Jira, and this is a product used to actually develop software via with teams and tickets and systems for releasing and backlog items, and it even has like a Kanban board built in. It's not the greatest product. They have incredible design, and you can look at this and it sure looks like it's a great product. It is a very powerful product, and it is used in a lot of corporate companies. Jira in combination with Bitbucket. But Bitbucket is where you actually can store your repositories. And recently, if you didn't hear about it, one of the competitors of Bitbucket, you could say, GitHub, they were purchased by Microsoft, I think a year or so ago, or very recently, but it feels like it was a while ago. And they just recently made it so that private repositories are no longer cost either, but they depend on how many users are collaborating on a project. So this is one of the products, but they have a tutorial that has, what is version control as well. And it's a little bit more in visually, aesthetically, more enjoyable. They also have a Git cheat sheet, and this you can download, and it has everything that you need to learn, you could say, of different commands for doing different things and what you would be doing with them and why. And that's really helpful. So there is, migration to Git if you're not familiar with Git and you're maybe using a different, a lot of people will use SVN and some still do, as well as collaboration and specifics on that and syncing. And there's just a lot that you can dive into and learn about this. And it's important that you do. Now, before I showed you this Bitbucket, what Bitbucket is often used in corporate environments, but it is not the only kind of, if you will, way to manage your Git and the code for your teams, or plan your projects, or collaborate on code, or test your code, or deploy your code, which means like push it out into production, right? The users are using it, the clients are using it. GitHub is very, very well known, and GitHub is also an alternative, I guess you could say, competitor to a product like Bitbucket. And GitHub allows you to essentially create your repositories, which are essentially just your various directories of code, if you wanted to break it down. And it allows you to track all that you're doing in that with commits. And then you can, go back and change versions. You can look at it. So if we actually look at, for example, this Go app that's using Gin framework with Auth0 and JWT for authentication, and then React for a view that I built, you can see that it's pretty straightforward. I'm a user, this is my repository, and in here there are a ton of powerful things that are going on, but this is a graphic user interface for managing Git. To create a new branch, you would be using Git. You would be doing that possibly in your terminal. You would be checking out and checking different branches. So different users of this, or collaborators, if you will, or contributors on a project, in this case, it could be in the format of a team, they can be on different branches working on different features and then merging them into another branch, which is kind of like, you could say, maybe a developer branch where it's not quite in production yet. And so you can manage what's coming in and what changes are coming in from different files via pull request. And it's kind of a weird name, even though it is pull request, like that's just what it is. You can collaborate with other people's code or the code that you're working on by making a change to a file and putting a pull request in that is essentially comparing the existing code to the code that you have and the changes, and then determining, people are reviewing that, hopefully, to determine whether or not that code should come in, if there should be any changes to it, etc. So there is also with GitHub issue tracking. You can track issues and bugs. You can, add features. You can create your own labels for them. You can even manage this all in a project with GitHub. You can do pretty much everything that you really need to do in GitHub. And so it's a great resource. And you can see that there are a lot of companies that open source their code. So for example, Facebook has a Facebook GitHub page, as well as kind of like their kind of testing environment, GitHub. But you can look right into the source code of whatever it's written in, and you can see that people will, star, favorite, or fork, which is like taking this repo and saving it as one of their own repos. And it'll say, where it was forked from and everything like that. But this is a way that you can see their source code that they're working on or that they're releasing to the public. So it can be open source. It can also be private. And that's great. But the other alternative to Bitbucket and GitHub is GitLab. And this one's relatively newer. It's apparently incredibly powerful. Apparently it leans more towards not just software development, but actual it's more in tune for DevOps, is what I've been told. I haven't used GitLab like I would actually probably want to. It sounds like there are a ton of powerful features. It's got great branding, just like GitHub. But I'm not really sure. I haven't had any need to, I guess, make the switch from GitHub to GitLab. I think maybe there will be a situation from that. But there is also pricing for this. GitHub's subscription base is a little bit more affordable, but you can see, it's free for if you're building stuff on your own, pretty much, and pretty cheap monthly if billed annually, even all the way up to gold. Like that's not a lot for a large size company to pay, to be honest. So it is per user, but it's definitely what you need to create projects and work and maintain projects. So GitHub, Bitbucket, and GitLab, they're more of the competitors against each other. GitHub is often where a lot of people will just go they'll git initialize their project, and then once they've initialized it with Git, they'll actually set it to the URL of their repository link here, and you can create a repository or import a repository. You can create organizations where you can manage your code under that. You can have private or public. So, sometimes I like to work on stuff and I don't want it on my GitHub. I just will put that as a private project. Some people, they're skeptical about putting their code anywhere. They just leave it locally. That's great if you have a real nice fail safe for your system. But it is nice to have stuff that's not just on your system in case anything goes wrong. You can just clone it down, is what the word is. And that's why it's called clone. You're literally taking that repo and that bulk of code and cloning it onto your local system so that you can make changes or create a branch. And really it's just like that. The production, if we were to imagine Git and version control, production is like the roots and the trunk of a tree. And so with this term branching, this is how I like to explain it. You have the real true connection to the ground, right? And that would be like production. You don't want to you don't want to hack that thing down. You don't want to test on that. Like that is where it needs to stay strong and sturdy, because that is what has its roots into the customers, and that's what they're going to see and experience and use and stay attached to, right? Ultimately, so that's kind of like the main branch. A lot of people will have like a branch for then development, maybe even a testing branch where, you'll have people who are QAers or quality assurance of code, and they'll look at code and they'll test it. They'll even write, certain tests that are automated. Even for the front end, you can use, automated testing for for your code. And so there could be a couple of branches. Now, let's say we had a developer branch. We might have a developer branch that we use to merge all of our various features in, that we use to create another branch for a specific release, meaning, version 1, version 1.1, version whatever. We're not going to get into versioning right now, but I will post a link below of like semantic versioning. But yeah, that is pretty much how this whole thing works in real life. And there is that cheat sheet from this site that you can use, as well as this. I'll send those so you can look at the specific commands and just follow it. Actually create a new repository, initialize it, learn how to link it to perhaps GitHub after you've created a GitHub account. And you can actually connect to a lot of tools and create a lot of accounts with different tools by authenticating in using your GitHub account. So if you're going to start using different tools, you're going to definitely want to have a GitHub account regardless. It'll just make it easy to log in and authenticate and integrate. But that being said, you can clone down a project, and that production root is like the trunk. And then let's say you have your developer branch, where then you have branches that spread out from that, and those branches are like maybe feature requests. Hey, we want to add a new page that has this, and this. And that might break into one branch that has a couple of other little branches, and maybe different developers are working on different parts. And in order to stay connected after that branch is finished, the feature's finished, and essentially it's, the leaves have sprouted, you could say, you're going to have to merge back into your developer branch back down to actually get that update all the way down to the trunk, which would be production. And there's a process for that, and you're testing that before it actually makes its way into the changes that are visual to a customer. So that's a lot, but that is pretty much kind of in essence what we're dealing with here. And the big holdup is, I think people will talk about this contributions. A lot of recruiters that are looking at new developers or developers in general, they'll go look at GitHub, and they're looking to see if you have a GitHub. The problem with that is that this contribution number is not always the best indicator of skill by any means. And for some reason, that is something that recruiters care about. So I usually recommend for side projects, maybe use GitHub. But ideally, it's kind of impossible to tell. You can see I've dropped off a lot of commits. That's because I no longer, where I did work, transitioned from GitHub to Bitbucket. For DevOps and for other reasons, they wanted to switch to Bitbucket, which I don't like Bitbucket as much as GitHub. I think it's not, I just don't like it as much, but it works really well with the product Jira, which I mentioned earlier, hopefully, I think I did, which is a way to actually manage your features with tickets, and you can have different teams working on things. And this is a whole different product for more of like the product management space or project management or lead engineers to be able to see what their engineers are doing, and for agile stand-ups every morning to talk about what you did the day before quickly and what you're doing today, and close these tickets and report bugs from maybe a support team and all of that. So it's a very practical thing you'll be using. And so I would treat it professionally as you're learning it, because you are going to be using it professionally. So you need to know it so that you don't have to ask somebody, how do I create a branch? Or what are you talking about when you say that I should have created a branch for this feature that I'm going to be building or working on, or bug fix or whatever. So this is stuff that you should know. That being said, there is a cheat sheet. I think I said that, but I will link that as well below. Now, that being said, if we actually go ahead and look at this, a lot of people also get confused about the next level of kind of customization, or, how can this be made even easier for me? There are three main ones that are known. The first one is GitHub also has a graphic user interface that you can download. I think it's like download, it's the actual graphic user interface. And so you can actually download it, and this is what it looks like, and it shows the differences and stuff that you can see in GitHub anyways, but you can do, there's a little bit more powerful features here that you otherwise wouldn't be as simple to do, as well as just Insight. And so it's a native application for desktop. And then there is Git Kraken, which is another, you could say, competitor to GitHub's specific graphic user interface, But GitHub is not really like their graphic user interface is awesome and they definitely put work into it. But GitKraken's like sole purpose is to create the tools that will allow you to manage a whole team and look at everything in a more visually aesthetic way and be able to do things visually because it's a graphic user interface a lot simpler. But it is still, not necessarily steep, but something you'd have to learn on top of understanding Git and understanding what you're using. You can use GitKraken for a project that isn't on GitHub. It's not necessary for Git. It's not that these tools only work with one or the other. You could have a team that's on the same company that is front end that uses GitHub for their projects, and then the back end team in DevOps uses Bitbucket. So you can definitely mix and combine here, but a lot of it's going to be dependent on the team. But GitKraken is really great. It's very powerful. I think it's pretty aesthetically pleasing. They have great documentation, great videos. They're definitely rocking it. And there's integrations. You can see they're open to GitHub, they're open to Bitbucket, and they're open to GitLab. So, and even Azure DevOps. So they're definitely trying to create a product that is the next level above maybe something that's just used for hosting and managing code, to just make it even easier. And there's pro features, of course, because they have to make some money somehow. Now, another alternative to GitHub Desktop that is not GitKraken is Atlassian's other product, SourceTree. So you can imagine this is kind of maybe like licensing for purchasing. A lot of corporate companies will kind of get the Atlassian suite and they'll get, Jira for project management. We'll just use Bitbucket for hosting our code. And then, we'll also get access to SourceTree and maybe Confluence or something like that. So that can be why people tend to use, or companies tend to use this stuff, not necessarily because it's better. And that's, some people, when they're paying a check for something, they don't care about what's better because in their mind it's more expensive and they think that that's a higher expense, when sometimes it's actually something that can, save time and actually save them money. So it just depends on who's looking at it and how they view the cost reduction or, increase. And that's more of an economic and business thing. So I love SourceTree. I use SourceTree. I originally downloaded GitKraken and messed with that for a while. I just like the simplicity of SourceTree. It's great. It's very powerful. It helps me, stay up to date. Unfortunately, getting a ton of emails about different changes and pull requests and stuff like that, or things getting merged in, it'll fill your inbox real quick. So because it'll fill your inbox real quickly, it can get very, very intense, and you can just start filtering it out in your mind, and you'll just literally check all, read all, right? Like read all, and then you'll go and look just for an email that's targeted to you. So I think that having a tool like this can also be very influential for teams. But that is the difference. So if somebody says, well, you should learn Git, and you don't know what Git is, and you're confusing it with GitHub, you're actually you need to learn Git. And then GitHub is a way to, host your projects and manage your projects and create branches and things like that. And that's kind of the sequence of that. Maybe I'll do a video next where we actually just initialize Git and create a project from scratch on GitHub and initialize it. And what I was thinking I might even do is do that for each platform. So GitHub, Bitbucket, and GitLab, and just do the whole thing from scratch in a short amount of time. So I might do that for the next 3 videos because it's something I could record for all of them really quickly and consecutively and then put out and publish. I know this video is about past 20 minutes now, so I don't want to go into it too much more, but hopefully this helps and you understand that if you're downloading the graphic user interface, you might be a little confused as how to create a branch, for example, or how to check out to a branch. Maybe you're using the graphic user interface, but you don't understand what that really means for Git, and so you're trying to use a user interface that might be actually making you skip some steps, etc. So definitely look at Git, look at the actual tutorial here for getting started, and do this and learn why and what you're doing, and doing it in the terminal, which they'll give you examples of and explain things, and that will give you a solid premise to then jump right into your whatever poison you choose to pick. So that being said, I love GitHub. I'm not a big fan of Bitbucket. I think GitLab looks really good and is promising and is powerful. I'd like to also use that maybe for some other projects as far as, additional layers of graphic awesomeness that'll make it even faster and make you even more efficient. I would tend to say and suggest Git Kraken because that seems to be something that will the aesthetics of it will lure you in and keep you looking and researching. But if you want something really practical, SourceTree I believe is also free, so you can use SourceTree. And that's pretty much it for this video. Hopefully this helps you. I will link everything below. We have so much content to get through this year. I can't even fathom how much content I have to get through. So if you haven't, check out the first video, watch the videos up to this. And we are so close to finally getting the code. After we cover, maybe the next video or a video of creating a project and kind of demonstrating what it would look like in the real world with maybe GitHub, for example, or Bitbucket, I am going to dive into HTML. HTML first, just a video on HTML, maybe a long one, maybe one part two. Then CSS, which is possibly going to be a little bit of a lengthier part of the series. And then JavaScript, which we're going to sit in JavaScript land for a while because there are a lot of people that are learning JavaScript because of boot camps, and they're skipping a lot of really in-depth JavaScript. They're not necessarily skipping, they're just not getting into the details and the core language and how the compiler works. And so there's some, some questions there that I've received myself quite a bit. And so I'm going to try to answer as much as I can in JavaScript land, which is going to be a lot of fun. And then we'll work on frameworks. And then from there, we'll go into, we'll keep following that roadmap, which is going to be very front end for a while until we hit back end. So definitely be thinking about what these tools are. If you are putting them on your resume and you've had very little usage of them, you're gonna be expected to know how to work in a real world environment with other developers on different branches and be able to do that. So if you're putting it on your resume, just make sure that you know what you're dealing with, and potentially the fact that you could go somewhere and work somewhere and they're like, we use Bitbucket. And you're like, Bitbucket? I've never used that. I've only ever used GitHub. Well, that's going to be an issue because ideally if you learn Git, you'll be fine. But if you don't learn Git and you just learn how to, use GitHub, you might be fine, but you might find out that you're going to struggle a little bit at first with figuring out how Bitbucket works or GitLab, for example. So thank you again for watching. I know this was a long video. I'm obviously fired up right now, and I'll look forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.